I think when I was watching Andor, what I found so refreshing about Andor, and in my mind, in my head canon, you could watch Andor, Rogue One, Star Wars, and Empire, and never watch any more Star Wars and get all you needed about the franchise.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think that you watch everything else has been, in a way, compromised. I mean, as much as, and I'm not saying that they're bad necessarily, but once Star Wars became Star Wars, the franchise, it lost something. Because even Star Wars itself, especially, there's a great ILM documentary, and they go in, you see some footage I've never seen before on the making of Star Wars. It was a film that George Lucas had an idea, but so many of the collaborators that he had, including his wife Marsha Lucas and Paul Hirsch and Richard Chew, the editors, and Gary Kurtz, who was producing, and ILM, and all, they were finding these things as they went along. It really crafted what Star Wars was. And Star Wars, as much of a fairy tale as it is still very sophisticated, and it's a product of the 70s. And then when Lucas hired his old film school professor, Irvin Kershner, to direct Empire Strikes Back, Irvin Kershner he elevated that material. It wasn't like, I'm only making a fairy tale. No, he tried to elevate that material and make it for everyone. And when I watched Andor, I saw a guy in Tony Gilroy who wanted to say, okay, well, how does a rebellion start? And as far as the Empire is concerned, all we've ever seen are the highest echelons of the Empire. But what does the Empire look like? What do workaday Imperial officers do? You know, how do they work? And why is the Empire something that we should rebel from? And I really was knocked out by the show. The pacing was very different, but the tone of it and what they were showing us, it really delved into, because people forget, Star Wars is a show about, well, originally the movie was about a rebellion against an empire. And it was a reflection of human history and how many empires have existed and how many rebellions have been fought, even in the 20th century. You know, obviously Return of the Jedi was inspired by what was going on in Vietnam. And it's interesting. That's what I want from I want, even the biggest flights of fancy, they have to have something to say about us, the audience, in some way, shape, or form. Every good story has basic human truths embedded somewhere in them. But I feel that what's happened to these franchises, Star Wars and Star Trek in particular, is that they're no longer about stories that relate to the audience in some kind of allegorical way. They're only about themselves. You know, Star Wars has become so insular. I've been watching Ahsoka. And while, yes, the 4th episode was good, I'm still like, what does any of this have to do with the original Star Wars in terms of the story that was being told? And what I loved about Star Wars is it's basically the story of a truck driver in Han Solo, a farmer in Luke, and Ben's a veteran of foreign wars. And then like these two lower class servants that kind of rope him into this journey. But they were all of us. You know, you watch Star Wars, we're all Luke Skywalker. As I've said a million times, when he's sitting there watching the twin sons of Tatooine setting, and you hear the theme, John Williams' great theme, the French horn, you know, na 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 na. Everyone was Luke there. Everyone understood. He's like, God, everyone knows he's in this shithole.
Yeah.
If there's a bright center of the universe on the planet that it's furthest from, we've all been there. And then there's always, you know, Han Solo rolls in, the cool guy that seems to can solve all the problems, but he's just going by the seat of his pants too. Burt Reynolds is the bandit and Smokey and the Bandit.
I was just about to say, you could make a case that Smokey and the Bandit. I just watched a Jerry Reed video the other day. It was crazy you mentioned that.
It was, and those movies came out the same year.
You've got the truck driver, you've got the hero type, and then you've got the girl that's trying to get away. And
and we all recognize all that stuff, and now there's all this lore, you know, in the world between worlds and the whales that use the Force. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, it's cool, but I think in a way, whereas Andor brought it all back down to earth, you know, Andor showed us things that we suddenly could then And while I appreciate, like, I'm watching Book of Boba Fett, And I'm thinking to myself, what they should be looking at is like Scarface. I'm thinking Boba Fett should have been Scarface, where Boba Fett's sick and tired of being who he is, and like Tony Montana, he's like, no, I'm going to take this for myself. And I'm going to become a crime boss. I'm Michael Corleone or something. And I wouldn't, if I was making the book of, if I was in charge of making the book of Boba Fett, I would have told everybody that we're making a cross between the Godfather and Scarface. But instead of Tony Montana getting high on his own supply, Boba Fett is going to come in and there's been a power vacuum left by the end of Jabba the Hutt. So he's going to roll in and take over. And he's going to be ruthless. And he's going to do, and I was expecting that. I was expecting some kick-ass, something analogous to a great crime epic, whether it's Christopher Walken in King of New York, whatever it is, whether it's Goodfellas, Godfather, take your pick. I didn't get that. And I was watching Boba Fett. I mean, and I think everybody watched that show and they're thinking to themselves, what the hell is this? Like,
I never envisioned Boba Fett as a kid growing up and having the figure and the mystery around Boba Fett, because he only had a few minutes of screen time in two films. He showed up in the second one.
He even has the poncho of Clint Eastwood from the Man with No Name trilogy.
I never envisioned Boba Fett, coming out of the Sarlacc pit 40 years later and doing what he did in that show. Like I that would have never been where I would have taken it.
I mean, he's chasing a droid around a kitchen. And when he gets the droid by the neck, he's like, I am Boba Fett. Like, what the hell is that scene? Like, the person that was writing that scene, and then they filmed that scene. If I was, I mean, I know people would say this is what Kathleen Kennedy was supposed to do, but she turns it over to her creatives. But if I was looking at that scene, I would have said, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
What is this? I mean, Boba Fett is the guy that outsmarted Han Solo. He knew Han Solo's tactic of having the Millennium Falcon float away when the Star Destroyer dumped its garbage. He knew that. He was able to get to Bespin before Han Solo did. He was smarter than Han Solo. He knew what was up. And it's like you turn him into a goof that's running around a kitchen.
So why do you think that, you mentioned the original Star Wars movie, Empire, I think about Luke, looking beyond the stars, and then in Empire, Yoda says, always looking to the stars you were, never your mind on where you were, what you were doing. And it's almost like Yoda becomes all of our teachers and parents and trying to tell you, like, look, you're a dreamer, but you're not focused on the here and the now. And then to talk about Andor, the scene of Luthen where he's in the bowels of Coruscant, and you have this great actor that sums up the whole rebellion in a fight for a sunset that I'll never see.
I mean, genius.
And like that, I watched that, and now my co-host doesn't like Andor. I rated it higher. Once we were done watching Andor, I liked it a lot more when I saw the pieces, because I loved Luthen and I loved the character of Deidre. I thought Cassian was not really the character to build the show off of.
No, I agree.
But I love the fact that Tony Gilroy saw Star Wars and said, I'm watched it, and I'm very much fascinated by who were the people, the characters that started the rebellion. That's the concept with which a script starts. George R. R. Martin saying, well, how'd you come up with Game of Thrones? I came up with this thought in my head of a scene of the Lord of Winterfell, and he's standing by a creek, and they see the dire wolves. They find these little wolf pups. And that was the beginning of Song of Ice and Fire, like something that lights the fuse that becomes a great story. Where did it go wrong with Lucasfilm with what they did with the movies, the sequels, and then the stories like Boba Fett and Obi-Wan? Like, where was the disconnect? Either before it got to Kathy or with where someone said, wait a minute, this is not the story we're telling, or this is not what we need to do.
I think the disconnect comes when, again, it's one of my axioms of life in terms of storytelling. When you put your agenda or your universe before your characters and your story, and Disney's like, okay, we spent $4 billion. We now have to make Star Wars the most family-friendly thing ever. We have to make sure that it's not challenging, that it's a 4-quadrant thing, that it provides the familiarity that Star Wars will provide, that kids can watch it, little kids can watch it, and it appeals as much to little girls as it does to little boys. And what they forgot is you got to tell a kick-ass story. The only thing, it doesn't matter what your franchise is. And we're seeing this now. We're seeing this with Marvel. You know, they told the 23 movies in the Infinity Saga all built upon one another. You had individual movies that worked as individual movies, but they also were adding to the larger tapestry of what led to the creation of the Avengers, then Hydra, then all of that, and then Thanos overarching everything, and then leading up to this conflagration, you know. But with Star Wars, Disney just said, you know what? Let's just we'll just retell what worked before. Well, let's just kind of retell a new hope. And in doing that, that's such corporate thinking. Because the thing is, a corporation can't quantify what makes a great story. Because everybody will tell you something different. But everybody knows a great story when they see it.
Right.
Kind of like things that are obscene. Well, I can't describe what it is, but I know it when I see it. Well, you know, I think that it's unfortunately it's problematic in that a corporation doesn't know what a good story is. They can see the results of when a story is told well and how much money a story can generate. But do they know how? Like, I'll give you a great example to me is Nicholas Meyer, who directed Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. He'd never really watched Star Trek, ever. So they brought him in. He'd written a novel, The 7% Solution, about Sherlock Holmes, and then he wrote the screenplay that the movie was based on. And he made his own movie, Time After Time, based on H.G. Wells, but it was an original story.
Love that movie.
Such a great movie. And the thing about him is he comes from a very educated family, a family of artists and musicians. He had a very great classical education. And he understood that Star Trek was very much, it came out of the traditions of the naval fantasies or the naval stories of like Horatio Hornblower. And he understood what classical storytelling is. So he comes along and he can watch 10 episodes of Star Trek and he can be like, okay, I get the form. Now, it wasn't about Spock having pointed ears. It was about the essence of who Spock was as a character. And Nicholas Meyer understood that. And so we were able to get Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Now, the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, didn't like its nautical or its military influence, as much as it was. But the story that Star Trek II told was, first of all, it was a story about, when did you ever see fictional characters that were on TV? Back then, it was unusual in 1982 to see them in middle age. You know, to see characters that you knew on television from 10 years ago suddenly in a movie. This was a very unique thing. And now they incorporated their age and middle age into the story that's being told. And you're dealing with more mortality and morality. And then you have a villain, a man that was an antagonist that became a villain because of the inaction or irresponsibility of Captain Kirk. So what you had was a creator who understood great storytelling coming in and taking the Star Trek form and doing something new and unique with it, but still understanding how a great story is told. I think the problem with Star Wars is Tony Gilroy understood that, and that's why we got Andor. But, you know, not to slam Dave Filoni, but if you look at Clone Wars and Rebels and now Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan, these stories are only about Star Wars. They're just about the internal, what are the Jedi doing? And it's like, no, you're missing the point. You need to look outside of Star Wars and figure out how is a great story told within the Star Wars universe. I mean, I'm watching Ahsoka, and while episode 4 was good, I was thinking to myself, what is this about? You know, now it's the world. What does the world between worlds have to do with Star Wars, the original? Nothing. There is no world between world in Star Wars. This is all stuff that's been added and incorporated by other people, which is fine. But and a lot of our franchises have a lot of people contributing to them. But the question that I have is, you still have to make a story about something. And I wonder, what is Star Wars even about anymore? Tony Gilroy told a story that can apply to any rebellion throughout history. And it gave us, like, how does a rebellion start? The banality of evil, looking at how a workaday empire treats people on the planet that they're based on, or whatever's going on. A character like Mon Mothma having to navigate her married life with her dignitary life, with her starting a rebellion life. I mean, a person living 3 different lives and how dangerous that is. That's something that works in all different genres, not just Star Wars. And that was I think the genius of Andor, is that he dispensed, yes, it's firmly set in the Star Wars universe, but he's not telling stories about the Jedi or anything else. I mean, he's telling the stories about real people. And that's what I think every franchise needs. And if you don't have it, they just die on the vine.
And with Tony Gilroy, thinking about Ahsoka, it's never been more relevant. With Tony Gilroy in Andor and in Rogue One, the stakes are extremely high, and characters that you love on the screen die, and most of them die. As a matter of fact, almost all of them die, because it is a life and death struggle where the odds, you hear it in the original Star Wars trilogy, but in Rogue One and in Andor, it is, hey, we have extreme odds against us, and we're probably not going to make it out of here. But going back to what Luthen said, but we're fighting for a sunrise that we will never see. You're fighting for something bigger than yourself. And with Ahsoka, I watch Ahsoka, and I've watched some of the other ones where it's like there are no stakes. You get stabbed right here. I thought a lightsaber was supposed to destroy the inside of your body, but nobody's dying. They're getting stabbed now with weapons that we grew up believing were lethal. And if you got stabbed, you were gone. Now they're not dying. People are going the world between worlds. So can you just basically say, you know what? This person's not really dead. We're going to do this. So there's no stakes. The stakes are not. You go, well, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because I know Ahsoka's not going to die. And if she dies, they're going to bring her back as Gandalf the White. And so she's not really dead. And you just go, you know what? Well, where are the stakes? You got to feel like that's what made Game of Thrones great. You get to the end of the first season and you go, wait a second. They just killed the main star of the show?
Yeah.
Nobody knew who Kit Harington was. Nobody, Amelia Clark, Kit Harington, Macy Williams, Sophie Turner. Nobody knew who any of these young actors were. And the story was, you know what? They are season 2, season 3, season 4, and we're building the story around them. But you get to that end of the first season and you go, wow, like the person that I thought was going to save the day is gone. What's going to happen now? And then you get into the Red Wedding and you go, wait a minute. The guy that was his heir and the son, who's now the king of the North, he's dead. His mother's dead. And you go, I've never seen anything like this on television. So it's the stakes have to be there. And I think Star Wars, they're not going on location, whereas Tony Gilroy does.
Yep.
They're doing they're trying to make the volume solve everything. And technology is great, but you can't sacrifice it at the expense of the natural landscape of where Star Wars was originally filmed.
No.
They filmed in Norway. They filmed in Tunisia. And being on location and letting the elements become a part of the story, another character, Tony Gilroy gets that. That's why Andor looks so good. Rogue One looks so good when you see Galen Erso in the beginning of Rogue One, and I think they're in Iceland maybe, and it's black rock.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You can't – you have to go on location to get that and to see the wind hitting his hair and go, you know what? I'm immersed in this. I'm buying it because I feel like I'm really there.